David Vizard here, and you are watching PowerTec 10. In this episode, I intend to outline the goals for this relaunch of PowerTec 10. Firstly, I want to make sure that I bring you, or me and the team, bring you the most accurate tech possible. Now, I know a lot of you are going to say, well, shouldn't you have an engineer on your team if that's so? Well, I'm an engineer. I get mistaken for a journalist very often because at one time, in spite of not being, in quotes, a professional journalist, I was the most published automotive writer on the face of the planet. Now that doesn't mean I can't do anything else. Nope, I did my stuff by virtue of writing about what I did. Not going along and taking on faith what somebody else might tell a guy who's got a degree in journalism but doesn't know anything about engineering. Now, I've got to tell you, I'm about as far as getting a journalistic degree as Smokey Unick. We're both in the same boat there. We haven't got a dog's chance of it. No. On the other hand, getting engineering qualifications was right up my alley. Right. So if you're reading some of my stuff and saying, well, hell, it reads okay, I'll say it once again. I was surrounded by brilliant editors. So let's start at the beginning. To state an obvious fact, I was born at an early age. I spent most of my pre-7-year life in Morocco. My dad was involved with air traffic control at Casablanca, and we returned home due to the fact that I got malaria and dysentery both at the same time. I was rushed to hospital and ended up in hospital in Bournemouth, England, where I got pneumonia. This nearly wiped me out. As a consequence of this, I didn't start school until I was nearly 7 years old. And since I'd spent most of my early life in French Morocco, my prime language was actually French and Arabic, not English. So I was not able to communicate very well with the other kids at school. And also, because I was such a physical wreck from the illness that I had, I didn't make friends very easily, right? It's not that I wanted to make friends, I was just too wiped out all the time to even bother. Anyway, one of the things I found out very early on is I liked making things. And this led me to make a lot of things which actually got me into trouble. A lot of things that didn't get me into trouble. I was into making model airplanes and bombs and guns, right? So I would have been on the CIA's suspect list for sure when I was a kid. Anyway, when I was about 8, I was building model aircraft that were pretty good. I mean, when I was about 8, I built a model Hawker Hurricane just from drawings, right? And it was powered by rubber bands and it flew very well. And I was broken-hearted when it crashed and broke, but that's inevitable with a model aircraft made of balsa wood and tissue. Anyway, to go on, I made this is more memorable things, models of ballistic missiles or flying bombs, right? Some of which were miscalculations of their range, and they went much further than they should have done and exploded over a housing estate, and it left a mushroom cloud that was probably 100 feet. Didn't explode when it hit the ground, it exploded in the air, which was a malfunction. And I thought, I'm going to be in trouble when I get home, I know it, because they'll know that I did that. Nobody saw it. It was a big bang when it went off, because I heard it from like over half a mile away, about 3/4 of a mile away. The other thing that I did get into trouble for was making a 9-barrel Gatling gun. That was, I guess I was about 10. And when my dad found out, it was the belt. Why? Because making guns in England is an offence punishable by jail time. Anyway, what else did I do? I made, I designed and built a 8-foot span glider. I designed and made about a 2-foot span control line airplane powered by a, I think it was a 1cc diesel. Yeah, it was about a 1cc diesel. And the list goes on. Also, I was into bike riding. It was a form of, how shall I say, exercise for me, because my lungs were in such bad state. I needed to keep physically fit just to be normal, right? And bike riding was it, because I could go faster on that than anything. Anyway, schooling was okay for me. I got into senior school and I had some good teachers there, a couple of good teachers, and as a result I passed an exam, a county-wide exam, which some 2,500 students took, and I finished in the top 8 and passed to college, and started college a year earlier than would have been normal, because I knew what I wanted to do, be an engineer. While I was at school, I had a lot of things, adverse things that I had to deal with. First off was bullying, right? I never complained about this, but I did get to a situation where I was able to turn the tables on bullies. I'm not going to go through it because it would set a bad example for many young people there who may not be able to deal with it in the way I did. Anyway, the situation was, it left the bullies very wary of me, and from the day I fixed it, I was never bullied again. So that's how I dealt with bullying. I'm very competitive. I won't back down from anything. That's how I drove on the racetrack. Now, let me get past the school bit and start off with where I was when we first started college, and I was 15 then. At that point, I'd had some experience with engines, namely one of those two-stroke engines that goes on the back of a bicycle and has a little cogged wheel that drives the tire. I was given this as it wouldn't run, and it turned out that the carburetor was stuffed full of trash. So I fixed that, and during fixing it, I skimmed the cylinder head to raise the compression, cleaned up the ports, made them a bit wider but not taller. I didn't know enough about engines, especially two-strokes at that time, to do much more than that. Put a different exhaust on there, which I calculated the length from, I think it was Philip H. Smith's book on the theory of intake and exhaust. I think it was that. Well-known book, that. Look it up. The theory of intake and exhaust practice. The theory and practice of intake and exhaust. Anyway, it went pretty good. I found I could ride up about a 1 in 5 hill pedaling, and it would maintain somewhere around about 25 miles an hour. And that, boy, that was fast for going up a hill like that. Now, so long as I could maintain the pedaling bit, that was fine, but my lungs were pretty shot, so I could only do it for maybe 60 to 90 seconds. However, in that time I worked out that I could deliver 3/8 of a horsepower additional to the about 1 horsepower that the motor delivered. Right? Now, 3/8 of a horsepower, you say, well, that's like an Olympic athlete. No, that's 3/8 of a horsepower with me as the load. Right? Now, that's not 3/8 of a surplus horsepower, i.e. I pedal, generate 3/8 of a horsepower and lift whatever a 3/8 of a horsepower horse would lift. No, it was my weight. So basically what I did was I relieved that motor of having to move a lot of my weight. Anyway, that worked out pretty well. And the next step that I made here was, now I'd be 15 then, I remember this, I did this on my 15th birthday. Or rather, I ran the first test on my 15th birthday, and that was a flow bench. Of course, calling it a flow bench is a bit of a joke, but basically, it's as described, just happen to have this book on the bench, is as described in this book here. Very easy to make. I used my mom's Electrolux vacuum cleaner, and it was one of those cylinder ones about, let me get back a bit here, about yay long. And if you take the bag out of it, it sucked pretty good. So that was one of those occasions when you want something that actually sucks. So depending on which end you coupled it up, you could either blow through a port or suck through a port. And I used, this was a mini 850 mini head, and I used a cracked block with a big cork-like object in the bottom of the bore connected up to the vacuum cleaner, and I measured the pressure drop in the cylinder via the spark plug hole. Right, I got a spark plug, smashed out the middle of it, glued a brass pipe into it, and coupled that up to a homemade manometer. Right, windscreen washer pipe and a long wooden rule from the local hardware store. Anyway, I managed to get flow figures and started modifying mini heads at that point there. And I remember I had a spare head which I let a friend of mine have, who was probably 3 years older than me, right? And he put this on his mini, he put this on his mini. No, the mini wasn't out then. It must have been an A35 or a Morris Minor. It was an A series engine, right? A 948 A series engine, and made a huge difference. Don't know what the horsepower was, but the local hill, Leckhampton Hill, he went up a gear higher than he did before, and way faster. I mean, before it was third gear and about 40 miles an hour. It was now fourth gear and something like 50. Anyway, that was my first experience. Now let me tell you about the effects of having started porting cylinder heads at that early age. So, with my first modified A-series engine cylinder head in hand, I took a trip to one of the established engine builders in our area. Right, here I am, 15 years old, clutching this modified head. And took it in to show the guy, and he said, and I said, look, I developed this on a flow bench, and his first words were, I doubt it. And that's because he didn't have a flow bench. And he said, anyway, flow benches are no good because, well, they flow at a constant rate, and in the engine the air's going in a pulsing fashion, right? Basically, he blew me off, right? So now I went to see the second guy who was a professional engine builder in the area. And he basically told me that I was a know-it-all, right? Coming in here and trying to convince him that a flow bench would actually show some good. He said if it was any good, I'd be using it. That's meaning him. Well, so that was that. Now, this, I've been plagued with this know-it-all bit. No, I'm not a know-it-all. I'm a guy who wants to know it all. There's a big difference here. Anyone that calls me a know-it-all is basically about 180 degrees out in the wrong direction. I spend my time learning. I'm an eternal student. If I knew it all, I would just sit back and do nothing. Anyway, I installed the head on a car and it proved to be very successful, right? And the next time I had a cylinder head done, I showed a guy that was quite a ways from me, and in fact in Birmingham. He's passed on now, but he looked at what I did and said, "That looks very good work." He said, "How old are you?" And I said, 15. "But I'll be 16 soon." So that gave me some encouragement. Anyway, I went on from there and ported some go-kart Villiers cylinder barrels and some odd engines where I knew it'd be better, but I don't know how much better. The people that I did them for came and went out of my life. And next step in the evolution of my character / personality was the acquisition of an Austin A30, an 803cc. That's 48 cubic inches. Boy, that's tiny. I'll tell you how that went. Now the next move was to try this hopped up A30 of ours in some real competition, right? First we tackled a few sprints and that, which were like 1,000 yards around a few bends and that on airfields, club events, small club events, and did quite well. Then came the first race for real. That was at Silverstone. Now I have to say, at the time I was about maybe 18, and in England to enter a race you had to have a driver's license, and if you were under 21, permission from your parents. Well, I knew I wasn't going to get permission from my parents for this. So what I did was, for the first races I did until I was 21, I either wrote permission for myself and signed it as one of my parents, or I borrowed somebody's license, entered the race under that, and this person would have to be over 21, entered the race under that name, and that got me by. Fortunately, I didn't do that many races before I was 21. Maybe it was probably less than a dozen, right? So in 3 years, maybe 4 races a year, but that's all we could afford. Anyway, here's the story of how that first race went. Got to the track. I'd been round it before, but not as a driver. I'd been taken round the track once. Once I had been taken around the track and a few laps by somebody who knew the club circuit and gave me some indications. Anyway, I asked a guy that was a serious racer with bucks to spend in our town if he had any tips, and he said, yes, keep out of everybody's way, you're a novice, right? Well, just before we got waved out on the track, it started to sprinkle with rain. Sprinkle was probably the right word for it. The track was wet, but not wet enough to throw up a bunch of spray. Anyway, they waved us out about 5-second intervals, and off we went. Now, I drove around the track for 15 minutes, didn't catch anyone, nobody caught me, so I was kind of on my own. And came in, asked my brother where we had qualified on the grid, and he says, I don't know, I've only got your lap times. Right? So anyway, just a little while later, a guy came around handing out sheets, which gave us our lap times. Much to my amazement, I was third on the grid. And the guy that I'd asked for advice from was probably 14th, 15th on the grid. That didn't make him very happy, I'm sure. In fact, I know the guy never spoke to me again after this event. And anyway, when it came to the race, it was still raining and the track was just throwing up a bit of spray, so you'd hit the wipers once in a while. I had a great new innovation on my car, right? Windshield washers. I'd put them on just in case it was going to rain and I needed to see where I was going. Well, anyway, off we went. The two guys that were in front of me on the grid slowly pulled away. The guy behind me slowly dropped back, and I finished third, right? Which I was overwhelmed with, and I thought, wow, with a car like I've got, which is not the most powerful in the grid, I was at least 10 horsepower down on other A35s. And that was it. It was awesome. Anyway, a good start to my road racing, but that's where it also ended. It turned out that I was a very good driver in the wet, and as soon as it rains, it sorts the men out from the boys. I didn't finish that high in the race for 3 years, and during that time, the A35 was sold, and we started racing a Mini, which of course had the benefit of far superior cornering. Anyway, that's where things started. And what with the start of my own cylinder head company with my lifelong friend Mike Lane, we set about being professionals in this business. And we were doing really well until, in fact, and I've talked about this in some of my other deals, the highlight of what we did was modify the heads for a Lola T70, and it was a small block Chevrolet, and it was 50 horsepower up on what the heads were that were modified in the US. That car, first time out, was stripped down at Hockenheim because no one could believe it was that fast. And then when people began to find out who did the cylinder heads, we were flooded with orders. In fact, in a month, we got orders for 90 sets of heads. There's no way we could do that. Anyway, unfortunately at that time, my chest illness ruled the day and I ended up in hospital, and basically we had to draw the line at producing cylinder heads for a living. That is where I decided I would go into research on engine work rather than do it practically for customers, right? So my customers would now be professional companies. And that's where I'm coming from. My customers, 9 out of 10, are not individuals. They are corporations who want this, that, or the other researched, right? So I spend a lot of time on the dyno, far more than most people do, because my customers want numbers, not engines. With that, I'll leave you. It's obvious this is going to be a two-part deal, so I'm now going to set about telling you what improvements you can expect with PowerTec. And I will see you over on part 2, which I will start immediately after finishing this one. So you can expect something pretty close on the heels of this video. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Right? I live on your comments. Thank you for watching.